All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks for checking out the film. Appreciate it. It is cold, isn't it? And joining me on stage are our two panelists for the night. We have Katie Matheson, who is with Alliance for a Better Utah, Communications Director, is that right? And then Gregg Schultz with Salt Lake Indivisible. And the reason I've asked you here is because we're not in Texas, and so why the heck are we watching this movie? I'm kind of wondering, as in your perspective, you know, how did this come home for you as Utahns? What did you see? What did this make you think about in the local electoral scene? And we'll start with whomever wants to start first.
Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so Gregg and I have both kind of been involved on the ground in politics in Utah and in kind of this movement that we've all seen in the past couple of years. And at first, as I was watching this film, I was like, Texas is very different from Utah. But in fact, there is a district in Utah that is similar in some ways to Texas. Now, Texas, of course, is much larger than Utah and is, of course, even much larger than a small district in Utah. But I'm sure you've all heard about the 4th Congressional District. And as I was watching this film, I was looking through the data of, you know, in terms of demographics, what Texas looks like versus what the 4th Congressional District looks like, and also in terms of statistics and how, you know, the incumbent, how much they won by, all these things. And there is actually a little bit of a correlation there. There's a little bit of a matchup there. So that is incredibly interesting. But also on a larger scale, I'm kind of I am convinced personally, and I try and convince other people too, and I usually get eye rolls, that Utah is in the midst of massive political change. And we are in a moment in Utah where that change, if seized, could be historical for Utah. And it's this moment where all of these different things are coming into place, and I know this because I've had national press come and ask me, what's going on in Utah? Because from the outside, we think it is one of the most conservative states in the country, and yet you have medical cannabis, Medicaid expansion, and fair redistricting on the ballot. Right. And so because of those things and because of other demographic shifts, we are one of the fastest growing states in the country. All of these things, we are in a moment, of course, when there is a lot of change possible. And of course, you saw it in this film. The same thing could be happening in Texas, maybe for different reasons, but the opportunity is there.
So I moved here from Texas.
Welcome.
I worked in the oil industry for 20 years. And I think Texas and Utah are similar in a lot of ways. It's a classic urban-rural divide. All the big cities in Texas are blue. You tell people that Dallas voted for Hillary Clinton fairly overwhelmingly, and people say, "Oh, that's not true," and then they go look it up, and all the big states were blue. Utah's a little bit different because you have a religious overlay that is also urban. So, but as the population grows, I totally agree with Katie that, and I know this from looking at statistics and being kind of an insider in politics, and also because I've been door knocking. And I door knock for just by background, I'm a registered Republican. I'm door knocking for a Democrat, and I'm only door knocking Republican doors. And so I do have a kind of a weird perspective on that, and I do think that the races are going to be surprising. I don't know if it's going to be a big blue wave here or not, but probably not. But I think that the margins are going to be a lot smaller than what people expect.
Yeah, and it's important to note that margins, so that's you know, how much somebody won or lost by, margins are incredibly important, because even though in the moment it's like, oh, we lost this race, that informs funding for the next time that race is up. And so to close a margin is important in the long scheme of change.
So like literally the National Party will say, okay, because of this margin next year we'll keep more money in a local race or something like that, or it makes it look like a better shot.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the party and it depends on the situation and what the party, what a party's decision making is. You know, if they decide that they're going to just focus on a couple of races, that may be different. But on the whole, and it's not just for parties. I mean, when I go through, or anybody who is politically involved and they go through and they look, is it worth spending my time knocking doors for this race? That was a 4.5, you know, they won only by 4.5 points last time. Absolutely, I'm going to be knocking doors in this race. So, I mean, another race of note is, of course, CD2, which is Shireen Gorbani and Chris Stewart. And she has closed her gap quite a bit, and we've seen that in the most recent polls. I think originally it was like 22 points separate, and she closed it to 11 points that she's behind on, which is remarkable. So it is important to note that.
Yeah, and you know, with the Shireen Gorbani race, there was a part in this film where he said that someone mentioned that no one had ever knocked on her door, and you know, no Democrat has knocked doors in Utah in like, what is it, 20 years or something, and so the Democrats have a phone app too. I don't know why they made it seem like that was a novel thing. It's pretty, it's used everywhere around the country. It's called Minivan, and but one of the points, I door knocked for Shireen, and one of the points she made is like, literally there's no data in Utah, none. And the fact of the matter is, I've registered 13,000 voters. We decided to register young voters. We registered 13,000 voters. I personally probably registered 3,000, and 3 chose a party. 3.
And so we want to open it up to questions, and what we'll do, because we're recording, is I'll repeat your question if you just want to sort of speak it from the audience. But before we move on, I kind of wanted to talk about this interplay of partisanship and engagement, and you just kind of brought it up. People aren't choosing a political side in the same way, but they maybe want to be involved in politics, and it seems like the line that we kind of inherited from the last generation of Utah politics is, well, my vote doesn't matter, so why am I going to get involved? And it seems like in both of your own ways, you're kind of combating that notion, if you want to speak to that.
Yes, your vote matters. I cannot tell you enough that your vote matters. Thank you. It does. There was a race that was won by 5 votes in 2016 in Utah. There were many other races that were won by 100 votes in Utah in 2016. Your vote matters. I actually was tabling this past weekend at the farmers market downtown, and we had this guy standing next to us who for hours was telling people as they came up. I had my brother's puppy, and so he was adorable, and everybody kept petting him. And of course, the only reason that I would let people pet him is if they told me they were registered to vote, and then of course they got to pet him. So as I was making sure that my civic engagement dog was helping people make sure that they were registered to vote, because ballots are going out, all this kind of stuff, he was saying, don't register to vote, it doesn't matter, your vote doesn't matter, just to start fights, right? And I said, don't listen to him, your vote does matter. And then at the end of this, I mean, it was 2 hours long. He said, okay, you've convinced me, I'm registering to vote, and I'm gonna vote. Because it does. It absolutely matters.
You think that's a weird story. I've had the same thing happen to me multiple times. It's not just that someone thinks their vote doesn't count, it's that they want to convince everyone else. I mean, it's just like the weirdest phenomenon, and I could go on and on of these stories of people, you know, it's unbelievable. If you ever want just like stories to tell, go register voters for a day, and you would just it would blow you away, the kind of things people say and think. But
Do we have any questions from the audience? Just raise a hand. Sure.
So I think it's important to point out that probably everybody here is already registered to vote, with friends, relatives, whatever. There was misinformation at the end of that film that said today was the last day to register to vote. That is absolutely not true.
Oh yeah, so this film was made for a Texas audience probably, and they had the date of, you know, what's the final date to vote. So do you know what the final day to register to vote is in Utah?
Register to vote at the voting polls on the day
yeah,
That
in Utah you can.
Okay.
law just passed. Yes, you can register to vote at the polls on the day.
But up until now, so I just saw this on the news, that's why I knew tonight. They said today is the last day to
For paper.
by mail-in,
Yeah.
but you can still go online, you can still go to
Yeah.
Yeah, so could one of you give us a
Sure.
summary of just like what, if somebody isn't registered, or if you're trying to convince your
Yeah.
friends and family to
Oh,
register?
I've done this speech
Yeah.
10,000, probably 30,000 times in the last. So today was the last day for paper registrations, but if you wanted to register to vote, you just Google voter registration Utah. It's the top hit. It's the website secure.utah.gov/voterreg. But it's just the top hit. You do need a Texas driver's license or ID to register online.
Utah.
I mean Utah. Sorry, yeah. A Utah license to register online. I don't know why that is, because you can use your social, last four of your social on the paper forms, but you can go, or I think you can go at the poll. I haven't figured that out yet, but if you register at the poll, you just bring your license and you can register at the poll. But everyone here is registered, right?
But your friends and your uncles and your cousins, nieces, nephews. All right, any other questions? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's wrong. Where do you live? What county?
Okay, let me just repeat the question
Okay.
for the recording. So the question was, are we only doing a write-in ballot for this midterm in Utah?
No. So on Halloween, if you live around here, Trolley Square has a polling station that's open for a whole week on weekdays. The Salt Lake Government Center on 2100 South and 3rd East is open, I think, starting on Monday for a couple weeks. You can obviously do your mail-in ballot. If you don't get that ballot by October 23rd, then there's a problem, and you still have time to register even online, but you need to investigate. It's the same way that I just told you to register. You can check your information. And then you have your precincts, and that takes some looking around to find out where that is, but most people know because it's like the elementary school by you or the high school, but most people, we are moving. It's automatic now that you get a mail ballot in every county but 2, I think.
I think I got that piece of mail, and mine was sort of saying that they were prioritizing mail-in ballots, but you can still go in person.
You don't need a stamp in Salt Lake County. You don't need a stamp in Salt Lake County. You can put it in there and it saves the county, but they'll pay your postage.
Other questions? Go ahead.
I'm new to Utah. I was kind of struck by the drawing of the congressional districts. There doesn't seem to be any district centered around Salt Lake City.
Hey, it's your lucky day. Oh, you can repeat the question.
Oh, yeah, so the question, yeah, go ahead.
What effect would Proposition 4 have if it passed?
Yeah, so the question is about Proposition 4, which is looking at redistricting and this idea of sort of gerrymandering or changing the districts from where they currently are.
Proposition 4, if passed, would implement a redistricting committee. And it's, I think, 2 people appointed by each of the parties, and then I think 3 independents or some kind of combination thereof, so that it's considered fair. And what the redistricting committee would do is they would write a map or create a map and then present it to the state legislature. And then the state legislature could either choose to pass it, to agree to it and implement it, or, this is the important part, if they decide not to use that map, they have to publicly defend why they are not using that map. And then they have to publicly defend their own map, which is not what happened the last time we had redistricting. Fair redistricting, which is Proposition 4, would also change the ways in which, or the rules around redistricting. So right now, there are very few rules around redistricting in Utah, and if you have specific questions, you can check it out on our website, betterutah.org, or call us and our policy director will speak with you about it. But essentially right now, there's a minimum requirement for like what a district has to look like don't break federal law, and that's about it. But beyond that, Prop 4 would add provisions like try and keep like communities together and try and keep geographically contiguous areas together and stuff like that. So it would make sense. And if I might do a plug here really quickly, our sister organization, ABU Education Fund, we host debates and panels and we release reports. And we just released a month or so ago a redistricting report that actually talks about unfair redistricting and how it impacts rural Utah. Because in Salt Lake, a lot of our conversation is centered around how gerrymandering hurts Salt Lake, which is not false. But there is also a part of the conversation where gerrymandering hurts rural Utah. 61.3% of the representation for rural Utah actually lives in urban Utah. And as we continue to grow in our unique needs of the rural and urban parts of Utah continue to grow in different ways, we're going to be getting a lot of population growth in Ogden, Salt Lake, and Provo. The needs of rural Utah are distinct, and then you have a representative for rural Utah who does not live in rural Utah, even though they may be a member of the same political party, having to make a choice between the needs of constituents in urban and rural Utah. So if you're interested, you can check that out too.
Another way your vote is very important, and the votes of the people that you might convince to vote, is the people who drew the maps flew a little too close to the sun, because now, they could have just had one district around Salt Lake, which would be a swing district. Salt Lake proper is fairly liberal, but the district would be pretty 50-50. But they got a little too greedy, and so now they have Mia Love and possibly Chris Stewart at risk. So in the next election, it's going to be even worse. So your vote is important, because if those races are tight, then they're not going to be so eager to win all four. They might just throw Salt Lake a bone and draw a district around it rather than put two at risk.
Super interesting. Other questions? So I feel like one of the themes here is you've got grassroots knocking on doors versus this idea of super PAC influence, and I was wondering if we have that issue in Utah as well, or another kind of angle on the same question would be, it seems like politicians gain traction at the moment when their constituents feel like they're actually being heard rather than manipulated. Like, is that fair to say?
Paul Ryan just gave Mia Love $1 million for ads for this race, so that is a thing. I mean, not Paul Ryan himself, it was Paul Ryan's PAC. So yes, that is happening here in Utah. Not at the same levels that we're seeing over in Texas. Texas got like $23 million for these Senate races, and in Utah we've got like 5 or something like that, so not quite, but yes, it is a thing. But there's also a lot of grassroots energy in Utah, I found, so.
Any final thoughts before we close it down for the night?
Well, I'll give one more little plug, which is originally I'm here representing Indivisible, which is a grassroots organization of about 7,000 people in Salt Lake. But I also run this PAC, and it is a super PAC, and the whole point of it is, they mentioned it in the film. They mentioned, not my PAC, but they mentioned the idea. Beto O'Rourke won his first race because Republicans voted in the Democratic primary. And I run an organization in Salt Lake. That's why I'm a Republican, is because in many, many cases, and certainly the congressional races, whoever wins your primary, Republican primary, has like a 99% chance of winning the general election for now. And so I voted as Republican, and I started a whole super PAC and had 7,000 conversations with people, getting them to, and it's not a trick. It's like I go, and now I know these Republicans. I'm a delegate. I'm a Republican delegate, and I know these people, and they listen to me, and you get to know the other side, the philosophical side better. But at any rate, it's something to consider. Is in order to vote in the Republican primary, you have to be a Republican. To vote in the Democratic primary, you can be either, and you can only vote in one primary. But if you wanted to, in Utah, you could register as a Republican, and a lot of people do that because wherever they live, it's rated like a Republican plus 30 or whatever, and they know whoever wins that. And there are quite a number of races, particularly in southern Utah. And I believe in the next election, it's going to be very tactical and strategic. There's a lot of energy in getting these far-right Republicans out and replacing them, because the caucus system, it gets very complicated. But there's going to be a lot of energy in moderating the Republican Party from within the party, and also from people like me who just like are realists. And they're like, let's vote for the most moderate person.
Well, that's sort of the way you've chosen to have the most voice in the political system that you're in. Katie, do you have any other thoughts on, if people say, okay, I vote, but when I write my representatives, they're so far into one entrenched camp or another that it seems like it doesn't matter, but I want to have more political voice. Like, do you have any suggestions?
Let me say first,
Yeah.
Utah in 2016 was 39th in the nation for voter turnout. And that was after like a multi-year high-level voter turnout. So 39 is a good number for us in the past 30 years. My goal is eventually to get us back to a 70% voter turnout, which it used to be back in the day. So don't only register yourself to vote and then go and vote. I'm encouraging everyone I meet to register and encourage to vote in whatever way necessary 5 other people. I've texted my family, my mom's sitting right here, I've texted all of them earlier today, you're all registered to vote, right? Because if you're not, you're dead to me. Not really, but I'm not above threats. Register, voters, and then yes, I understand what it's like to write your representative and feel like you're not being heard. I have tried for 2 years to be heard from my representative. Her staff knows what I look like. She and I have never met. I have never had a response beyond a form letter in response to anything I've done. And I decided to get involved in the system. And now I've basically devoted my life to this because it's so important. I have 2 kids, and they are going to be inheriting this earth, right? Not just my kids, obviously, but everyone's children. So if you are frustrated by what you are seeing, if you are angry at your representatives, first of all, that's democracy, and you are supposed to, you're not supposed to be angry, but if you are angry, that's okay. Channel it into something that will be effective. If that means that you go and decide to primary out a candidate, if that means that you decide that you see a party is inept, then you start walking into that party and change it. I mean, does anybody listen to Pod Save America? Yeah? And so there's a hilarious guy on the show, and he says, I got into politics. He worked for Obama's team for a while. He said, I got into politics because I walked into a local meeting, and you walk in sober, and they make you chairman. And that's kind of like, I mean, it's a joke, but just start showing up. It's that simple. Choose your issue and show up.
I have an easier rule, which is if you post anything on Facebook political, you have to do something to match it. And that's my rule for anyone
and double for memes.
Anything, and I just reply back, what are you going to do about it? Why don't you call your son, who 8.8% of Utahns under the age of 25 are registered, and make sure that they're registered or registered. Whatever it is, you can call your congressman or whatever you're comfortable with. But, you can't just complain. You got to actually do something.
Amen.
Perfect. Gregg, Katie, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.